Kenya's foremost literary voice, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, is regularly tipped for the Nobel Prize due to his passionate commitment to telling Kenyan stories to the Kenyan people in a language that's accessible to them. That artistic and political stance has cost him dearly over the years, but it's never stopped the ink flowing from his pen. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, thank you so much for joining us for this interview. Now, your latest book, The Perfect Nine, has received critical acclaim for its epic poetry, its thrilling adventures, and its powerful characters. At its heart, though, this is a creation story. As the author of dozens of books, you've been writing for almost 6 decades, I believe. Why did you want to go back to the very beginning of everything?
This myth of origins or creation of Gikuyu people has actually been part of my life. Every Gikuyu person in Kenya knows the myth. What I did was do my kind of interpretation of the myth to emphasize the centrality of women in the narrative.
There is a strong message of universality at the heart of The Perfect Nine. It speaks of human siblings, this equality between men and women. It is a very feminist attitude to take. And I wondered if it was inspired by real women who you admire or you've encountered.
I grew up surrounded by very strong women. First of all, during the Liberation War fought against the British, women were everywhere. They kept the homes together. They supplied those who are fighting in the mountains with food and other needs. But some of the women were also part of the fighting forces, part of the guerrilla fighters. Other women were put in prisons and detention camps, but that role is not often acknowledged, in literature, in power sharing.
Now, another reason the book has had a lot of attention is because you wrote it once in Gikuyu, and then you provided the English translation as well. And it's the first time the International Booker Prize has listed the author and the translator as the same person in their long list. Can you tell us more about the literary challenge of bringing the rhythm and poetry of those words in Gikuyu into English?
Every language has its own unique musicality. And often in translation, generally, it is difficult to kind of want to translate the musicality of one language into another language, because those musicalities are very unique to those languages. So you try and render as much as possible the spirit.
Now, you started writing in Kikuyu in the 1970s. At the time, it wasn't a widespread practice in Kenya. There was still a preference for writing in the language of the former colonizers, in English. You were actually imprisoned for publishing a text in your native language. What did the authorities find so unacceptable and so dangerous about you doing that?
Not just in Kenya, but in all Africa. Unfortunately, intellectual production is in the languages of the former imperial powers. Writing in Gikuyu and advocating writing in African languages, I am going against the trend. The main problem, quite frankly, is that when we use English or French or Portuguese, to remember that it's only 10% of the population who are conversant with English, French, or Portuguese, okay? The rest of the population speak African languages. Before, when I wrote in English, and I was equally critical of the post-colonial condition, I was not arrested. I was not put in prison. But when I said the same things, the same issues in a language that's understood by the community I was writing for, the play was stopped and I was put in a maximum security prison for a whole year, 1978. Yeah.
Indeed, the political potential of language is something you write about at length in the collection of essays Decolonizing the Mind. Now, that was published in English in 1986 and was later translated into French by Sylvain Prudhomme. And we actually asked him about his encounter with that book and what prompted him to bring those ideas to a French-speaking audience.
Même si on a derrière soi tout un ensemble de livres déjà qui n'ont cessé d'être habités par une pensée anti-impérialiste, anticoloniale, eh bien, en fait, on est rattrapé par le fait qu'on a produit toute cette œuvre dans la langue du colonisateur. Il y a cette dissociation au plus profond de la conscience, en fait. Il y a d'un côté la langue dans laquelle on ressent, dans laquelle on vit et on a toutes les sensations depuis la naissance. Et sans s'en rendre compte, on se met à écrire dans une autre langue que celle-ci, qui est la langue en fait du colonisateur. Et donc ça, je crois que c'était vraiment ça m'a marqué très fort. J'avais jamais pensé à ça en fait.
That's a very good comment. Very observant in his part, and I really appreciate, because that actually is honestly one of the problems. It's not that good books have not been produced in French and in English and in Portuguese. There, we have leading some of the very good books written by Africans in English and French and Portuguese. But that's not the point. We're also talking about the audience,
And more than 30 years after you wrote those essays, you made that argument for writing in native languages. Are you seeing that battle being carried on by other younger writers on the continent?
There's one woman who is doing very wonderful work in Kenya. Her name is John Obuchi, and she has started translating from other languages into Ekegusi, a language in Kenya. And she has also translated Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet in Ekegusi, and she's many more things. So again, here's a woman who is making a breakthrough, okay? She's a pathfinder.
After your time in prison in Kenya, you spent many years in other countries in exile, yet your writing always focuses on Kenya. So how would you say those years away shaped you personally and professionally?
You see, I grew up in Kenya, and my formative experiences were Kenyan. Particularly the most formative part of my life in Kenya, or growing up in Kenya, was the war which was waged by ordinary men and women against British colonialism, by the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, which the British called Mau Mau. Yeah? And I grew up in that period, and it was very formative to see ordinary men and women really waging this epic war against probably one of the most powerful colonial armies of the time. It was an epic struggle, and this really shaped my world look. So I still go back to Kenya. I know it best, and so on. Yeah, but maybe one day I will be able to set my novels elsewhere. But right now, Kenya really, and Africa call me. Yeah.
Now, you were born before Kenyan independence, when the people of your country were actually subjects of the King of England, and they fought in the First and Second World Wars as a consequence of that. Now, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission has just acknowledged this year that potentially hundreds of thousands of East African soldiers were, quote, treated unequally in dignity at the time of their death. They weren't given graves or registered correctly. How do you see that reckoning that's going on right now about the colonial period?
How this reckoning goes more deeply than that. But of course, it is important to acknowledge the role of, say, African soldiers, and not just from Kenya, but from all over Africa. They were in all the colonial armies, and during the fighting. When the war was over, both the First World War and the Second World War, they were treated like they had not existed. Having said that, the biggest problem in Africa's relations to Europe is still one of continued consumption of the resources of the continent. So the real thing is for when Africa is able to control its resources, make things with their material, and then exchange with the West and any other countries on the basis of equal give and take, right? Me, I see that as a real problem that Africa has somehow has to solve. Yeah.
Ngugi wa Thiong'o, thank you so much for your time and for this interview.
Okay, thank you.
La Médina de Tripoli veut dire beaucoup pour les habitants.
Bienvenidos a las noticias de France 24.
Thanks very much for joining us.
أهلا بكم في ثقافة في عدد اليوم.
Ravi de vous retrouver pour Afrique Hebdo. Au programme cette semaine.
نسمع بين حين والآخر.
This storm has hit New York City a lot.
To be a president. 3, 2, 1.
Madagascar fait face à une seconde vague meurtrière.
Almost 99 million of you watch us every week. So thank you.
شكرا.
Gracias.
Your confidence means a lot to us.
Muchas gracias.
شكرا على هذه الثقة.
Thank you.
Merci du fond de mon cœur.
Liberté, égalité, actualité.